very sure.
Hey guys, what's going on? I'm Vince.
I'm Greg.
I'm Mark.
And this is, again, M.G.V. vlog. So right now we're going to talk about two topics. So the first topic we're going to talk about is practical effects versus CGI in TV shows and movies. So actually, Mark, let's go. This is your topic. So how about you take it away?
Well, I think it's absolutely amazing how 30 years ago there were movies being made that were revolutionary at the time, and that was the effects that they had. They did not have computer generated imagery that they could use, to create certain scenes and characters, scenery and everything. It was, especially with the prime example of what's coming up with on this topic is the Dark Crystal, the new Netflix Dark Crystal series, and how the practical effects they used for the original film from Jim Henson Company is being carried over, 30 years later. They're not going to rely on, computer graphics and everything to create these characters in this world. They're going to use practical effects just like in the originals. And that, I think that it keeps it very much more real, as real as real can be in this world. And I think that they're I mean, we'll kind of have to wait and see how it is quality-wise when it comes out, but my hope is that over 30 years later, it'll be definitely worth a continuation.
Well, you can't forget that some things are, to me, I think some things are really done well with CGI. Of
course.
Like, to make things look bigger or make things look a little bit more realistic.
Yeah.
I think, too, the way they're doing the Dark Crystal series, as far as like keeping it old school with the puppeteering, I feel like it's almost like a nostalgia thing, because when we were kids or, people a little older than us that grew up on it, it's cool to see that still being used and to think that even in the present day of 2019, that they're still using puppeteering and stuff like that, which back in the olden times, you wouldn't think to use stuff like that. You know what I mean? I mean, back in the times, you would think of you that stuff, but right now, I was like, oh, I have a computer. Let me just throw it in there and run it through. But I mean, especially that same 2019, there's plenty of movies I've seen where it's 2019 and the CGI is just horrible. Because not everyone that can make a movie with a phone or like a computer and say, hey, look, I made this awesome movie. Like, but even the CGI looks so horrible. It's just crazy.
I personally think that it's movies like Jurassic Park and Aliens and films like that where, you give credit where credit is, given. Like, prime example, for anybody that is of a younger generation and the older generation that watched The Lord of the Rings, what made those movies great? The larger creatures were CGI, but orcs and trolls and certain other monsters, they were done with great makeup effects and puppeteer effects. You know what I mean? I mean, Jurassic Park, what made that movie so legendary back in its day was the dinosaurs were actually, robotic puppets. Same thing with the Ninja Turtles. When they very first came out, they were robotic puppets and with people inside the suits. So in effect of like Dark Crystal and a few other, shows that are coming back and everything.
Yeah.
I think it's like my feelings are, I'm not against CGI, but I feel when things are a larger grand scale, like worlds, backgrounds, and large creatures or large things, then go CGI. But when it comes to like something of people size or something of relative size, I feel puppeteer work is more frightening or more awesome to that respect because it comes off more realistic. Let's be honest. Are aliens more scary from the 70s with Sigourney Weaver because it was a dude in a suit, or the ones that are with the CGI? Because let's be honest, the CGI ones are not scary because they're fake, where the puppet ones or the costume ones are scary.
Well, that just goes off of what you were just saying about how like Lord of the Rings. I mean, think about the original the original Star Wars trilogy, how all that was mostly practical effects with a few CGI. Then the trilogy, then the epilogues came out and they were all CGI and people hated that. I mean, I think if you have a good, balance of CGI and puppetry, you can do a really good job with it.
I think everything is a staple of the time it comes out, or when it's made at least, not necessarily when it comes out, but it's more like they only had, I mean, when Star Wars was made, they used miniature sets to create the battle scenes and ships. And this goes back more than just like the 80s. This goes back to like Nosferatu, how they created Max Schreck to look like Dracula.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
You think about like a movie like that with what they had it was all lighting and how they created his. I mean, it was all him.
Right.
Everything was him, but the way that the prosthetics they use and everything. But it was with Bela Lugosi and the lighting, the the effects with his eyes and everything. That was those were tricks and camera angles, lighting, but the acting especially. Those were how they didn't have computers to create everything back then. They had to use what they had. But I think that's what Marvel people now. I mean, you can't create the Avengers without CGI.
Right.
Those movies. I mean, they have the budget to create,
sure.
$100 million film with, effects in every single scene. Whereas, you get, like there was a meme that popped up that showed, heroes in the 80s. You have Arnold Schwarzenegger, Commando. You have Chuck Norris, in Braddock. You have Dolph Lundgren. You have all of they're chiseled and they're like larger than life and they're like on the posters and it's like Jack Slater 4.
Right.
And they said, oh, heroes today, but you see Robert Downey Jr. in his suit, you see Mark Ruffalo. It's like people were, criticizing it, and it's like, well, you can't really compare like what these bodybuilder guys, because they didn't have CGI then to, Iron Man in a suit isn't just a guy, like it isn't supposed to be like a huge intimidating guy. That's why it was supposed to be when he says, big Captain America says, big man in a suit of armor, take that away. What are you? Genius, billionaire, playboy, philanthropist.
Yeah, right. Well, that's the thing. You think about it too, because everyone. Well, you can think about any generation. Everyone's going to compare. I mean, even something as simple as music. I mean, our parents and then grandparents. Everyone doesn't like the new generation, or they always think their generation's the best. But I mean, think about like Arnold Schwarzenegger in The Predator. He was like the main guy. Like you said, Chuck Norris. All them. They're all chisel and stuff for that. But those aren't comic book superheroes. When you look at comic book people, they're supposed to be like creative, like artsy wise, not like. I feel like the Predator, like in Commando or all those movies, those are like what people look like in real life, like real military people like that. But the comic book people are supposed to be like a fantasy thing. So I feel like CGI does help that. It makes it look more like a robotic suit and stuff like that. Because I mean, in real life, even with all the money, there's no way you can make a real working Iron Man suit that would function and fly around. It's impossible. You know what I mean? So you have to use computers to cheat a little bit.
It's also to the fact too, where I mean, us ourselves, like right now, we're actually comparing, like our generation and the past generations to the modern versions. And like I said originally, I wholeheartedly agree that some things they have to be CGI. I mean, like you just said about Predator, the dude who played Predator, and there's this old school family movie that everybody enjoyed way back in the day in the 80s called Harry and the Hendersons. Yeah, which is, a Bigfoot movie and stuff. And the funny thing is, the dude, he in real life, he was like over 6 feet, almost 7 feet tall. Big guy playing the Predator alien monster. All of that was like a giant rubber suit and stuff. You watch all these Predator movies that came out now, most of them are CGI, and whatever they do for puppeteer work or the guys in suits, they do camera angles to make them look tall, when the truth is that they're the same height as like tallest guy's like 6'4". This dude in real life was like 6'11", 7 feet tall.
Yeah. Except for that newest one that came out, there was a Predator that literally was like a mini Predator, and then he got killed by the other one, which I didn't like that one. But that's another move. That's another
day.
Interesting note. I'm just glad that Jean-Claude Van Damme didn't play the Predator after all.
I mean, he'd be doing a lot of splits and stuff like that.
He'd be doing alien split kicks. So he'd be ridiculous.
That's super funny.
Low key, I would kind of think that'd be funny too, though.
But I mean, there was one movie that suffered from CGI versus practical, and it wasn't as well received. It's not to say that practical effects would have helped it a great deal, but it would have been pretty cool. The Thing prequel that came out in 2011.
I didn't even know they made a prequel one.
Yeah, they called it The Thing as if it were a remake, but it was actually a prequel. Like I would have thought it would have been called The Thing, like Discovered or something like that. I mean, it doesn't have to be, but
so this time they used all CGI.
Well, they had an entire special effects team that created these awesome creatures, and they scrapped them. They just didn't use any of those, and they used all CGI, and it looked subpar. And the movie itself, it was decent.
Right.
I liked it because I'm a big fan of John Carpenter's Thing was that was Stan Winston, those effects, legendary. Still to this day, legendary. It kind of showed that when they made the follow-up, the prequel, the special effects they used were like the CGI just didn't capture the same feel as the original. Because when you saw a head turned upside down, grow spider legs, and start crawling away, and the guy's like, even before that, when the guy's head came off, and it was like just like, ooh, and it's coming apart.
All
And
the tendons and stuff. Yeah.
Well, sometimes the puppeteer makes it look more realistic.
Oh yeah.
But you know what's funny though? Going with CGI and the practical effects, it kind of brings us to our next topic, which is actually we're going to talk about how a lot of games nowadays are being remade. So, Greg, how about you? You take it away on this one.
Well, it's like if you remember from one of our previous videos when I talked about Resident Evil 2 and stuff. Resident Evil 2 is like the epitome of epitome. It's like the epitome of like basically what's been going on with rehashing and redoing classics. Resident Evil 2, Crash Bandicoot, Spyro, Medieval, the Skeleton guys coming out. There's more talks about like redone things, and I mean some of these I'm coming off are new, but I mean Nintendo was sort of ahead of the game with like Nintendo DS doing what is it called? Zelda Ocarina of Time in 3D. With redone graphics to be better. So point is that sometimes people are coming up with these formulas of like, well, what if we took our classics, polished them up to make them, brand new and awesome, and they're gonna, they'll sell themselves. But then they're starting to do these new things now, which brings us to our discussion here, which kind of ties in with, old school versus new school. It's the Final Fantasy VII and Godzilla and stuff. Godzilla, especially the recent one, because you had classic monsters in there. Some people loved the looks, some people hated it. Final Fantasy VII, I'll tell you why I highlight that one, because it's same story, same setup, and it's a classic. But the thing is that they really chopped it up and they're trying to drag it out as much as they can. Like way back in the day, it was 3 discs. This time, these guys are literally trying to make it like 2 or 3 video games like at a time. That's how big they're trying to make this thing, and like even bigger than 14 or 15. And everybody knows how big those games are. So if it's bigger than 15 and 14 and whatnot, then these games are going to be ridiculous. And entering into PS5 era. So
oh yeah,
I just think it's just going to be. Is point I'm making is it going to be good, a good thing, or could it be sort of like a getting too big for your own boots type of deal?
I hope it's not. I mean, from everything we've seen so far, I think that some of the best examples were when they. I mean, this goes back to GameCube. When they ported the Resident Evil games.
Right.
When Resident Evil 4 came out, they started porting all. Well, they had a higher quality remake of the first Resident Evil, and then they had Resident Evil 0 in the same year.
Right.
And then when they had Resident Evil 4, they started porting Resident Evil 2 and 3, and it wasn't necessarily for higher quality graphics. It was more to have those on the next system.
Right.
And then, with what they've been able to do with Resident Evil 7, which comes off the heels of the concept of Silent Hills, when they were going to do like a first-person game that mostly took place in a house. Yeah, that mostly took place that's a whole different topic with Silent Hill is going to cancel Kojima and Death Stranding with Norman Reedus, but we can talk about that one. But with the way that they did Resident Evil 2, they wanted to there was a few posts online, fan made versions of Resident Evil 2 from like a behind the character perspective instead of the angle from in the corner of the room.
You mean like a mod?
Right, there was a mod. There was a mod that they had made similar to the engine of Resident Evil 4, and that gave people a glimpse of what Resident Evil 2 could look like with higher quality graphics and from a closer perspective. And that kind of got Capcom on the wavelength, like, well, Resident Evil's been really coming back in a big way after several not so good games.
Yeah. Yep.
They, with what they were able to do with Resident Evil 2, as far as being a high quality remake, they are reimagining.
Well, that's actually what I was going to say. I like the word they use, reimagining, because as far as like games like Crash Bandicoot or Spyro, Crash Team Racing that's coming out pretty soon, or even the Metal Gear Solid. You remember it came out on GameCube, then they sent a remastered version, which was a better version than the PS. I think it was cool they used that word reimagining because it's literally they. Not only did they give the game an updated graphic, but at the same time they tweaked the story a little bit to intrigue. I feel like new players, but still keep it in the same universe that
Gameplay a
young
little
and
bit
old,
too.
yeah, that the older generation that play the game can feel like I feel like you know you can come in the middle, which I think is awesome to do that. There's a lot of games you don't find that anymore. When they remake it, they either change the whole story around or they literally redo the whole game, which might as well just be a standalone game or another concept.
I do think it was interesting to note that Resident Evil 2 was almost a completely different game. And at one time,
Oh, I didn't know that.
there was a Resident Evil 2. Or Resident Evil 1.5,
yeah.
whereas Claire was not Chris's sister. It was a female motorcycle rider, but she was, I don't know if she was a stunt rider or she
was a racer.
She was a racer.
And she was making a pit stop in the city,
yeah.
and look how that turned
Oh,
out.
Right,
you mean before the original?
Right, before Resident Evil 2.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, because that's why Resident Evil 2 is an interesting one that's had several different developments over the years, because it felt like they wanted to always surpass the original. So instead of it being in a mansion setting, they had it be in the city. They went from being the mansion was affected, now it's the entire city. The city's being overrun. So I don't know exactly why they changed it from the beta version, but it felt like there were some parts that they always wanted to include in Resident Evil 2. They might not have gotten the chance the first time because of limited time or anything, but it felt like there were parts of the HD version that they were able to expand upon. Even though there's some things that are slightly different, the story of the police chief is much different in this go around. Not very different, but
it's actually worse, which
Right,
makes it better.
Yes.
You know what I mean? If you can take a character and make it worse than what it is, like,
Oh, yeah.
like I know this is not exactly the same thing, but Beauty and the Beast cartoon, like, if I didn't think Gaston could get any worse, and then when you watch the live action version of it, like Luke Evans' version of him is way worse than the cartoon,
Oh, yeah.
like very bad. So if you can have room to improve all aspects of something, that's a win, honestly.
I think as long as they don't change the core story with HD versions of games. I mean, I know you were saying it's unfortunate when that happens. I mean, if they add to it, like
Right.
the Resident Evil game from they remade the high quality version for GameCube and then again for PlayStation and Xbox 360. It was that they included the villain character who was a girl who was like locked up in chains beneath the mansion.
Yeah, she was added to that.
Yeah, well, they wanted to include that character in the original, but they weren't able to do that.
Right.
So,
well, it goes to the same thing. I feel like remakes or remasters, reimaginings, people have the same expectations when they hear their favorite video game is going to be made into a movie. They want pretty much like at least 80% of the game that they know. They want that on the big screen with the little tweaks, because understandably you have to tweak it a little bit, but like what they did with the movies we talked about in our last video, they literally redid the whole thing and just slapped Resident Evil on it. So I personally hope that if they do, take a nod from video games that are being successful, like Resident Evil 2 and so on and so forth, I hope whenever they decide to remake games, because that's the trend, just like movies, they're remaking everything, I hope that they keep with that same mentality that you want to keep the core story the same with maybe new additions here or there and just make it have a better graphics, and everyone I think is going to enjoy it.
I think so too.
My last final thing that I'll definitely say on this is that be true to the fans and try not to make a profit. Like what I mean by this is obviously we all have to make profits, but I'm just basically saying don't do it at the sacrifice of making us wait, cancel things, or rescheduling things. Honestly, that's what I am talking about, because 7's been delayed too often, too much, and I will be for and against the 3-disc thing, because to be honest, sometimes you do gotta, in order to give the fans what they want and expand on it, sometimes you do have to spread it out a little bit more. So I just hope they don't go too far with it.
So before we finish, I do have a question for you guys. Like, what game, if you can think of, that you would like to have remade or remastered right now?
That is a good one. I would love either Parasite Eve.
Oh, I forgot about that game. That's a good game.
I would love Parasite Eve with Resident Evil's play style.
Yes.
Like if you could walk
Which
around
Resident Evil 2, like that.
It doesn't matter.
Oh, okay.
Like it's more just the way that like Parasite Eve played like Final Fantasy and the way that the villains would appear. And it's cool for Final Fantasy, but in a game like this, I was expecting more of a Resident Evil gameplay, where it's just sort of like you would walk around and literally see the villain attack. You know,
Yeah, right.
That one, and I know I always think of the ones with, that one, and probably either Clock Tower or Onimusha.
Onimusha, yeah,
Oh,
those are really good
Onimusha,
games, yep.
because they haven't had a new entry in that series in over 13 years.
Yes,
I think.
since the fourth one came out.
Since the fourth one, and that series, like Devil May Cry, because Devil May Cry's had several sequels since then.
Yep.
They should make the next one because the fourth one was a continuation, but almost like a spin-off because the first three involved Somonosuke.
Yeah, right.
And that was a great story. I recommend that series.
I like my favorite was the third one when the French
Jean
guy
Reno,
went back in time and he was running with him in like the second game. It was so cool. So Greg, what were you
saying?
Yeah, great. Or your remake one game at least.
Like, all right, so got two of them that people might have heard of. I think we need a Tomba to come back. That's an old mid-90s one that should come back.
No idea what that one is.
It's a pink-haired dude. It's sort of like a Sonic in a way. It's good. It's old school. And then another one is we definitely could use a great reboot of the Bloody Roar games.
That would be cool.
I've been seeing some people who are Street Fighter fans, Final Fight fans, and like all sorts of fighting style video game fans, where they've been talking about wanting to bring back some of the Bloody Roar games. For those of you that don't know what it is, make a long story short, the characters fight Tekken and Street Fighter style, but they also have the option to turn into humanoid animal monsters to fight each other and stuff. And it's like an extra cool concept to it. Think Kung Fu Panda, but even more violent.
Okay.
Right. And as far as my two, one of them actually would be the Soul Reaver franchise, because I don't know if you guys know any about that stuff, but it's like a cool, like, vampires are so popular.
You bastard! I forgot about that one.
Because vampires are such a cool concept.
A good one. That's always a good one.
That's like a timeless thing. I feel like vampires never go out of style. And the whole thing we're having Azrael, he's like a vampire, but he's like a zombie vampire that eats souls. I think that's just a cool thing to see, like, what they would do with, like, new graphics and just a new generation. My second game that I would remake is I'm just kind of stealing one of my friend's favorite one is Taifu. So this game is a one that he actually got me into, Greg. It's a story pretty much like Kung Fu Panda, but instead of it being about a panda, it's about a tiger. And pretty much he runs around. They're all like, humanoid animals. And he ends up, he's with the snow tigers and he goes with the dragons. And just imagine like Kung
Fu Panda. It's a revenge story.
But more serious and just more like a hip, cool character. So I would like to see them, remake something like that just to bring it back. Because I feel like Kung Fu Panda is like funny for kids. And I feel like Taifu is like a teenager type thing. Like you can have adults and kids both appreciate it. But those are mine. And all right, guys. Actually, how about this? If you guys pick one or two games you would like to see remade or remastered, leave us a comment on the bottom. Make sure you like, share, subscribe. And again, I'm Vince.
I'm Greg.
I'm Mark.
And this is our vlog, guys. Thank you. Hopefully you stick with us for more videos. Later.
Peace. Actually,
I don't think that got the whole thing